What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Rewired Soul podcast. It's your host, Chris. And for those of you who are not following me on social media, which it should be at the Rewired Soul on Instagram and Twitter, always linked down in the description below. But anyways, this week is super duper exciting. I'm doing 5 episodes, so Monday through Friday, 5 different authors, great thinkers, and we're talking about something so important. So before I introduce today's first guest, Andy Norman, I want to talk about why we're doing this week. So the overarching topic of this week, it's scientific thinking as well as healthy conflict, right? So one of the reasons I love to read and learn so much is because I know that it's difficult for so many of us to share different ideas and thoughts. And, sometimes we just get these insane ideas and spread misinformation or believe the wrong things and stuff like that. And I'm always curious about, how do we talk about this? How do we become better thinkers? Because I used to think science was like mixing chemicals and stuff like that. But scientific thinking is more of a process to improve our decision making and understanding of the world and what we're all trying to do, which is get closer to truth. So the other important aspect of that is how do we have difficult conversations with people we disagree with, whether it's on like politics or morality or religion and things like that. Because we can all coexist, but we need to get deeper into kind of how we think about this stuff. So today's first guest is Andy Norman, and he is a philosopher of science. And I heard him talking to Michael Shermer, who will be a guest this coming Friday. I heard him on Michael Shermer's podcast, and I was like, this guy's amazing. I need to get his book, Mental Immunity, the second it comes out. So Andy, his whole thing is kind of talking about how we need to build up our mental immune system. We need to check the information that's coming in. We need to check our own beliefs. And as we do this, it's kind of like an antivirus, which is very, relevant. And I think, it's easier for us to find the similarities with, the COVID vaccine coming out and stuff like that. But how do we immunize ourselves from bad ideas? How do we make sure that we're checking the ideas that are coming in? And this kind of stuff, this whole week, all this stuff is so important to me because being able to question my own ideas and beliefs is what pretty much saved my life when I got sober. All right. I had to start questioning everything and realizing I'm not the smartest person. But something else Andy and I talk about in this conversation is this balance between skepticism and, just trust, you know what I mean? Because if we question too many things, we will drive ourselves insane. But anyways, this week is so important. So make sure you are subscribed or following on whatever platform you're listening on. We have 5 amazing guests. Tomorrow I will be talking to Lee McIntyre, who wrote a book called The Scientific Attitude. That's also a great one. But anyways, like I said, make sure you follow me on social media at The Rewired Soul. And down in the description after this, if you like this book, if you like this conversation, you will love the book. So make sure you check out Andy's book, Mental Immunity. It'll be linked down in the description below. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Mr. Andy Norman. Right. So welcome to the podcast. Andy, how you doing this morning?
I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you.
Awesome. So for those, I was just recently introduced to your work, but for everybody listening who has yet to meet you, what's kind of your background? What do you teach, and what's the book all about?
Yeah, so I'm a philosopher by training, and I've been in the philosophy racket for several decades now. I've dearly loved teaching, and although I don't have the privilege of teaching college students at the moment, for a long time, I've been trying to help young people become better critical thinkers. And about 30 years ago, I discovered that there's actually a better way to think about critical thinking, a way that can actually help us accelerate our progress towards a world where everyone's a critical thinker. Mm-hmm. And the core idea there is that minds have immune systems just as bodies do, and that these immune systems function to protect us against infectious ideas, just as the body's immune system functions to protect us against infectious microbes. And just as the body's immune system can function at less than peak capacity and sometimes fail badly, the mind's immune system tends to function at less than peak capacity and can sometimes collapse.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the cognitive contagion we're seeing in our world today, where utter nonsense spreads virally around the world, is a sign that our mental and cultural immune systems are in dramatic need of an upgrade. And so my book, Mental Immunity, is all about how we can do that and spare future generations from the kind of social dislocation that really has been afflicting our species for thousands of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's why I really love the immune system analogy. And here's the biggest question I have. Like I'm just a guy. I love to read, I love to learn, I love to ask questions and have conversations and all that. But when I read books like yours and I read books on critical thinking and skepticism and having conversations, here's my question for you. Who is the target audience? And here's why I ask that. When I read a book, right, like we're talking about how bad ideas spread, and just off the top of my head, I recently had a guest who debunks conspiracy theories like QAnon. Like
Nick West, right?
Yep, there you go.
Sure.
Like when I read his book or I read your book, I'm like, is somebody who believes in wild conspiracy theories going to pick up this book, read it, and take these lessons in? Or like, so what's the target audience? What's your hope, or how do you hope to get this message out there?
Yeah, so I call this the cranky uncle problem, not because I coined the phrase, but because a fellow researcher, along with Nick West and myself in this field, is named John Cook. And he actually has developed an app where you get to actually interact with your cranky uncle who's a conspiracy theorist, and you try to debunk his conspiracy theories in a way that doesn't inflame his mind's immune system and lead to pushback. So it's the cranky uncle problem, and frankly, the cranky uncles who've gone down the rabbit holes of the world are the hardest cases.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps the people who need cognitive immunology, the science of mental immunity, more than anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm under no illusion that all the conspiracy theorists out there are going to buy my book and heal themselves. It doesn't work that way. So it would be lovely if it does, but I think the realistic thing is to adopt a more patient strategy. What you do initially is you help boost the mental immune functioning of the willing, first and foremost, meaning people like yourself who really care about educating yourself and improving your critical thinking skills. And then because you can do that and begin to raise your own, become a better enforcer of accountable talk, then the conversations you have with others start to influence them, and it propagates outward. So I'm not going to try to cure all the world's conspiracy theories in one step, because I just don't think that's possible, right? But it turns out that time and again in human history, people have introduced philosophical insights that have propagated outward through the culture and changed those cultures in dramatic ways. And that's what I'm trying to do here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's really, relevant too, like, and it makes more sense during this pandemic, and with the pandemic kind of ending, like if we get vaccinated or immune, maybe it'll help others. So I really dig that.
Exactly.
And
in the same way that, maintaining our immunity to COVID is a team sport, right? We have to, we all have to do our part if we're going to reach herd immunity, or if we're going to stop COVID from spreading. And in exactly the same way, if we want to create a culture that's immune to wacko conspiracy theories, we all have to do our part. We all have to do our best to inoculate ourselves and encourage inoculation among the people close to us. And I'm talking here about mind inoculation, not body inoculation.
Yeah. So what's interesting, and like I learned about your book when you were on Michael Shermer's podcast right before it came out. I was like, I have to get this book, and you two talked about some really interesting stuff. And in it, and in the book, it seems it seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, you see certain aspects of beliefs and ideas as kind of black and white, and you have in the book you kind of discuss, these bad ways of thinking. Like, for example, everybody's entitled to their own beliefs.
Right.
So can you kind of discuss that? Like, one of the metaphors I love that you use is our ideas are kind of like a community garden where it can mess up other people's gardens.
Yeah.
So in your opinion, or like, what are bad beliefs, or what are some of the things that we do that kind of hinders our mental immunity?
Yeah. So you've hit on what is perhaps the central philosophical question at the heart of this entire cognitive immunology enterprise. And by the way, those aren't scare quotes. These are quotes that just mean the science is new, the terminology is new, but it's coming, it's going to stay. The science of mental immunity is rapidly becoming a scientific reality. So no scare quotes here, just helping you get used to a new term.
Yeah.
And the central philosophical question behind cognitive immunology is what is a bad idea, and how do you know if an idea is a good one or a bad one? And I'm not claiming to be the arbiter of that. I think in most cases, the facts are the arbiter of which ideas are the good ones and which ones are the bad ones. So, so here's the thing, right? We live in a culture right now that tends to assume that when you label something good or bad, you're just issuing a subjective opinion. You're just valuing it, and all valuing is subjective. So who's to say if an idea is really good or really bad? The problem with this who's to say question is that it basically absolves you of responsibility for making tough moral judgments. I call it a mental immune disruptor because it's an excuse for being responsibility avoidant. In the same way that I'm entitled to my beliefs, so go away with your critical questions is a responsibility avoidant behavior, right?
Yeah.
Now, it turns out we need to shed those ideas and the responsibility avoidant behaviors they foster if we're going to create a culture that's more immune to nonsense. Now, so the alternative to regarding value judgments about ideas as subjective is to reserve the term bad idea for ideas that have objectively problematic properties. And there are many properties that we all recognize as problematic. If an idea is useful but false, the fact that it is false counts against it. It should count against it. It's an objectively negative feature of an idea if it is false.
What would like an example of that be?
Useful but useful but false?
Yeah.
Sure. So as you might guess, because I appeared on the Michael Shermer show, I'm not a God believer.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that the idea that God will provide, God will take care of me. I have zero evidence that that's true, but I'm quite confident that it can provide psychological benefits. Believing that can calm your mind and make you feel less vulnerable to the world. And that's an important psychological effect. And in the same way that the possible falsehood or the definite lack of evidence for that belief counts against it, I also argue that the psychological benefits of a belief like that count for it. So we need to, when we evaluate ideas, we need to look at what I call the upstream evidence, and we need to look at the downstream consequences of believing or accepting it, because wise thinkers take both into account. So for a long, long time, the discipline of science has said, well, let's pay attention only to the upstream evidence and let the downstream consequences of belief be what they are. Meanwhile, the religions of the world say, well, you know what? Actually, these beliefs give me hope. These beliefs gives me courage. These beliefs inspire me. These beliefs make me a better person. The religions of the world have long recognized that our ideas and attitudes have downstream consequences that can have a huge impact on our well-being. And of course, religion and science have been butting heads for centuries. And what I try to do in chapter 6 of the book is say, we don't have to take an either or attitude here. We can take a both and attitude, because each of these two institutions has a handle on a piece of the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Both upstream evidence and truth do matter, the way science has always insisted, but the downstream consequences of belief also matter, the way the religions have always insisted. And a genuinely wise person pays attention to both and tries to fill their minds with ideas that check all the boxes, that are both true and beneficial.
And yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, because myself, I'm an atheist as well. But real quick backstory: I got sober in 2012, and it was through 12-step meetings. And what I didn't realize is a lot of people going to 12-step meetings are atheists or agnostic, but they're always talking about the God and spiritual thing. But kind of like what you're talking about, I found the benefits in this kind of just belief that, there's, I'm not, for me, it was more of a control thing. I can't control everything, right? Even if it's just like the weather or circumstances, things are chaotic. But, I'm not a religious person. I'm not a believer, but it was, this kind of belief that things can get better, things aren't in my control. So that, I don't know how many of the listeners, that resonates with, but if I'm understanding you correctly, the wise person, what we're trying to do is balance those two things, like understanding that, like, that we can have belief and hope, but there's also scientific evidence.
Yeah, I mean, it can be hard to be both realistic and optimistic, right? A lot of times a sober look at reality can be really depressing. And the trick is to hang on to your optimism while also being, honest with what the world is really like. My beef with many of the world's religions is that they try to bias optimism at the expense of their intellectual honesty, right? And that always has side effects that harm. So if you indulge in willful believing for the sake of your own psychological health, but pass on costs to others because of your lack of intellectual honesty, you need to rethink whether you're being a sufficiently responsible thinker.
Yeah. So are you saying, kind of like, just for example, the belief that you don't need, modern medicine because God will heal, because that has consequences for other people?
That's a beautiful example, right? So if you decide that you're not going to get your child life-saving medical care because God will provide, right? And your child dies, you've harmed, in fact, you've killed somebody that modern science might have saved because of your faith.
Yeah. So in your opinion, what do you think the solution for that is? So, like, I grew up here in Las Vegas, where we have a very large Mormon community here, right? We're right next door to Utah and all that. But for most people, they're born into it, they're raised into it every single Sunday during the week, so what are even some, like, are there any potential solutions? Because it feels like your entire life and identity revolves around this. So how is somebody supposed to separate those two things?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I think many of my non-believer friends are kind of disdainful of those who are raised in religious traditions. I myself think it's important to be much more patient and compassionate with people who've been raised in such traditions and have developed religious identities. It's not easy to let go of any identity, religious or secular. And sometimes the identities we embrace don't serve us well, and they don't serve the cause of human well-being well. But they become kind of emotional crutches for us, right? They help to solidify our sense that we belong, or our sense that we matter. But you can't just do that willy-nilly around any set of beliefs and assume that you're doing the right thing. So one of the things we know is that when you hitch your identity to a set of beliefs, your mind responds defensively to challenges to those beliefs. And by the way, the kind of defensive reaction here is exactly like an immune overreaction.
Yeah.
So in the same way that your body's immune system can freak out and start attacking things it shouldn't attack, your mind's immune system can freak out and start attacking good questions and dismissing them before they ever have a chance to change your mind. So a really good way to reduce inflammation, the mental analog of bad inflammation, is to let go of beliefs that are part of your identity, or treat them as house guests that might wear out their welcome. So when we cling to beliefs like heirloom furniture, then our minds become closed to information that might actually allow us to learn and grow. And the solution to that is to not hitch your identity to any set of beliefs, but instead hitch your identity to something like honest inquiry, which will allow you to continue growing throughout your life.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like it's weird. This is the first time I've talked about my sobriety on my YouTube channel for years, but this is the first time diving into it. But I worked at a treatment center for 3 years, and something I noticed really quickly is, the problems that people who struggle with like addiction or other life circumstances, like they're facing the same issues as other people. And it's these belief systems, right? Like my big aha moment when I got sober was just kind of like what you were talking about, was just start to ask, questions and keep this open mind and asking like, why do you believe this? Why do you believe these things that you believe? But it seems like, it's not just certain groups. It's not just conspiracy theorists. It's not just religious people. It's not just addicts. So how, like, and you've been teaching for years, like, have you seen anything that kind of induces that kind of aha moment, like where it's okay to question your own thoughts and ideas and beliefs?
Yeah, actually, yeah, I've seen that happen many times. Sometimes in my classroom, sometimes just in conversations I'm having with friends or even strangers. You hit on a good point. It's not just the wackiest conspiracy theorists that are the problem here. Every single one of us harbors mind parasites. And by the way, mind parasites have flown under the radar under the label bad ideas for a long time.
Yeah.
But I'm relabeling the mind parasites so that we do a better job of hunting them down and removing them.
Yeah.
Every single one of us can improve along this dimension. And in fact, everyone you know in your life who is not profoundly wise has work to do to strengthen their mental immune system. I actually think that deep immunity to bad ideas is essentially wisdom. And our culture is not producing wise people at anything like the rate it needs to if we're going to save our planet from destruction.
Yeah.
So we got a major wisdom deficit problem, wisdom gap. And I think this new science of mental immunity can help us span that gap, can help us address the issue.
Yeah, and you talk about how you started teaching and stuff, and I believe it was like the first semester, first year, right? Like you were like super nervous and all that, and then you started asking questions like, and now you've been teaching for years, and you ask your students to think on stuff and ask questions like, when you say like our society isn't really helping people to foster these kind of questions and to get rid of these mind parasites, where do you think the solutions start? Like, is this something that we should like start teaching in grade school? Is there something in the school system? Is there any way to rehabilitate adults? Like,
yeah, I think we should start really young. There's actually a movement for philosophy for children, which is, I think, has wonderful power. If you've ever watched a group of children get excited about a really simple, basic philosophical question, like, I don't know, is the fish Nemo real or not? There's a wonderful video on YouTube where a dad who uses questions masterfully to get his 2 young daughters to reflect on whether Nemo is real. And the kids are all kind of confused about how you test things for reality. But they're actually working it through and becoming wiser just as you watch. And it's just a beautiful little demonstration of the power of sort of just open-minded philosophical conversation to make us more discriminating consumers of beliefs about what's real and not real, or true and false, or good versus bad. These are all the questions philosophers have wrestled with for thousands of years, and it's the job of people trained in philosophy, like me, to actually encourage people to think collaboratively about these questions in the classroom. And that's what I've done for year after year after year. So yeah, given the amount of time young kids spend in classrooms, the first 20 years of their life roughly, we have to be making better use of that classroom time to promote mental immunity to bad ideas. I mean, the fact that viral nonsense is spreading around the world in alarming ways, even among the college educated, is a sign that our educational system is failing us badly in this regard. And I think the way to address that problem is to redesign education in ways that spark a passion for idea testing.
Yeah. I have a 12-year-old son, and it's something that I try to do, and something I often wrestle with is, and I think a lot of parents do, like, what's the school's responsibility? What's the parents' responsibility? Like, I'm a big mental health guy, right? So, I've taught that to my son since he was like 5 or 6, because I don't expect school to do that. And, same thing with like testing ideas. I ask him questions. I just try to get his little wheels turning and thinking.
Beautiful.
And yeah. And I guess like that's kind of where, some of the issue is like, what should the parents be doing at home? Because if the school's not doing, because we got to redo all these curriculums and everything. But maybe you could help me with this. And this isn't just for my son, but it's for all of us. And you touch on this a little in the book too. Is there any point where you're too skeptical? That's my issue, right? I question everything. Like, I remember you and Michael Shermer talking, like, are people naturally gullible or skeptical, right? And whenever, like, you introduce yourself to me, I'm like, is this guy's name really Andy? And I start questioning it. Like, my immediate reaction is skepticism, and I don't even know if that's unhealthy. Like, so
it is unhealthy, in fact, and that's a wonderful question, right? So a lot of us who are raised in the Western philosophical tradition, or who are raised in our current world where critical thinking is prized, at least in higher education circles, critical thinking is practically a sacred value. A lot of us say question everything. In fact, I had a bumper sticker on my car for many years that said question everything. But one thing I studied in graduate school was the question of whether it's possible to question more than is healthy.
Yeah.
Whether it's possible to be too skeptical as well as not skeptical enough. And the answer is yes, it is possible to be too skeptical. There are some questions that are not worth asking. And in fact, a hyper questioning mindset can turn you into a conspiracy theorist.
Okay. That's good enough to scare me out of being too skeptical, I guess.
There you go. Well, I mean, if you actually, so a friend of mine is a philosopher of science who went undercover at a flat earth convention. And what he discovered was that some of the leading thinkers in flat earth theory, they're not dumb. They're enormously clever, and they've worked out these very sophisticated arguments. The problem is their minds are inflamed by a need to question things that aren't objectively questionable,
like
not question things that really are objectively questionable.
Like what sort of things are?
So I'm going to use a joke here to illustrate this point. Okay.
Lay it on me.
So Fred, the flat earther, dies and goes to heaven. St. Peter meets him at the pearly gates and said, come on in, Fred. You're lucky customer number 100. You get a chance to chat with God. So Fred marches into God's inner sanctum and says, God, I've been a flat earther my entire life. I just have to ask, is the world flat or is it round? And God goes, oh, he says, Fred. Sorry to say this, but the world is very, very round. And then Fred's face registered shock and then recognition. And he says, this conspiracy goes higher than I thought.
Yeah.
Right. So you get the idea, right?
Yeah. So that was another question I was going to ask. And maybe this ties in together was you talk about sufficient evidence, right? Like, so for like Fred, right? Talking to God, like if God, the creator, told him, is that sufficient enough evidence? How do we know when we have enough evidence, or is this something worth diving into, like the ridiculous example I gave earlier where I could question whether or not your name's Andy? Like, how far am I willing to go? How much time am I going to
Exactly.
spend trying to find sufficient evidence for something like that?
Good. Yes, it seems to me that when I meet somebody, like when we meet on and you tell me your name's Chris, I'm perfectly happy not to question that, because I have very good reason to think that your self-report of your name is reliable. I can't even imagine why you would lie to me about something like that. And so for me, I don't waste a lot of mental energy asking, questioning, is this guy really telling me his real new name? I mean, clearly that would be kind of a wasted use of mental effort. And that goes to show, I think, that the important thing is to ask, not to question everything, but to question the right things in the right way, at the right time, to the right degree of skepticism. And the question of, what is the right degree? What is what is the threshold for sufficient evidence? That's a really hard one to answer. But I do know this, that the amount of evidence required is always context sensitive. So contrast the following two cases. Case one, I'm hanging out at the bar with a bunch of buddies and we're arguing over who's the greatest running back in the game. And I just decide to, stick my chest out, stick my chin forward and say, Le'Veon Bell is the greatest running back in the game. And here's why. And I give you a bunch of reasons, and the rest of y'all can just go take a hike. Now the relevant standards of evidence for that kind of shooting the shit talk is pretty low.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of times you keep it low just so that you can have the fun of pugnacious guy talk. Right. Now imagine you're a safety engineer at a nuclear plant. Now the evidence standard, the threshold of sufficient evidence is higher now, because the consequences of being wrong are much higher.
Yeah.
So I can't basically say, I can't say in a context sensitive way that 95% likely is the relevant threshold across all contexts. Now it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. It depends. Like, we have to work out, the consequences if we're wrong and things like that. And
Exactly.
yeah, and kind of like what you were talking about too, like this kind of like waste of mental energy. Like sometimes when I notice this like kind of extreme skepticism, I really enjoy books. I had a previous guest, Stuart Ritchie, who wrote science fictions, and there's a lot of authors who dive into studies and they talk about how these studies were done, incorrectly, or there was biases, or you have people like Andrew Wakefield and stuff. But every single day we're inundated with news about the latest study, the latest research, and, with so much bias and polarization and political agendas, like whenever I'm reading or hear anything, I'm like, do I have the time to go in and look up that research paper and see what the sample size was, see if it was conducted properly? Like, I would go insane. So
Right.
what is a man like you with building your mental immunity? How do you deal with that? Because those can have consequences, right? Like the COVID vaccine.
That's right. No, and this is a great question, right? Because no one of us has enough time to go down all these rabbit holes and find out whether so-and-so's, claims about alien abduction are really evidence-based or not. Look, I think the wise thing to do here is to recognize that we have to crowdsource the search for truth. No one of us can do it ourselves. And this means that you hazard your own sort of cutting edge opinions in areas where where you have developed expertise, and you withhold making confident pronouncements in areas where you don't have much expertise, but you're also entitled to have pretty good assurance where other experts who don't have an axe to grind have come to some kind of consensus.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there are lots of experts out there who tell me that quantum physics, the equations of quantum physics are right. That there's just piles and piles of evidence that the equations of quantum physics are right. I have no way of testing that theory myself. I just don't have the competence. But people I respect and who've earned their stripes and who have zero political, ulterior political or motives, who have zero scientific incentive to kind of try to pull to fool us about something like that. I'm content to rely on their authority in cases like that. And that's very different from just relying on the authority of cranky Uncle Frank, who happens to have gone down a particular rabbit hole on the internet and who claims that the election was stolen. I mean, that's just not the same.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. And yeah, like I don't know, because one of my goals with this podcast and the content I make and stuff like that is to try to get, to the average person or the cranky Uncle Frank and things like that. But do you think, this is something I wonder about, do you think that people often neglect or aren't aware of some of the motives behind who they're getting the information from, right? Like, for example, the conspiracy about the fraudulent election, right?
Good.
Like, it was different. You couldn't find, people on the opposite side who were like, hey, there is some evidence. Something I personally do is I try to look for like you were mentioning, I try to look for the best evidence against what I believe in, right? From a respected person with some authority. But yeah, do you think people aren't really aware, like, oh, this person might be getting paid, they might be making money, they might, something might be dependent. Like, do we not question that enough?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually a beautiful question to ask. So it turns out there are a whole lot of people making a ton of money by spreading disinformation on the internet. And the way they do this is they exploit mental immune systems, they hijack gullible or vulnerable minds, and sometimes they fill them with conspiracy theory or just, toxic, the idea that climate change is a hoax. That's perpetrated by the fossil fuel industry. The idea that the election was stolen, that's been perpetrated by Donald Trump because it serves his political interests. There are hugely biased people out there who are spreading disinformation on purpose to feather their own nests. And if you buy what they're selling, they're playing you. And you're letting yourself get played. So I think the question, what is the source of this information? Is this information reliable? And who would benefit from me believing this? These are critical questions to ask. And it turns out that, skilled critical thinkers ask them, make a habit of asking these questions. And they get relatively good at spotting the disinformation peddlers out there. Other people don't have the benefits of a fancy education or an inspiring teacher who actually helped them understand these things, and they fall prey often not because they're stupid, but because our society hasn't equipped them. But we can take a patient, understanding attitude, help equip them, and help guide them out of the rabbit holes they've fallen into. And again, that's hard work. But I think there's beautiful and inspiring examples of people who've done that for people who are who've fallen into rabbit holes. And my own efforts focus not on curing people who have profound mind infections, but in preventing mind infections. So it turns out that an ounce of prevention here is worth a pound of cure. Yeah. It's far easier to inoculate a mind against a conspiracy theory than to help somebody get out of a cult.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes total sense, is try to prevent it from happening in the first place, and then eventually that will just kind of die out, those bad ideas and things like that.
That's
yeah. And God, Andy, I could sit here and talk to you all day long, but I'm gonna ask you one final question. Something that you discuss in the book is that when we have these conversations, when we talk, when we debate ideas and everything, uh, we have to yield to the better reason, right? Like there's some point, like even the analogy you gave or the hypothetical you gave at the bar, talking about the best running back and stuff. Why do you think, and I'm sure there's some neuroscience behind this and stuff, like why do you think it's so difficult for us to just yield to the better reason? Like cognitive dissonance kicks in and we're like, nope, nope, nope. Even with the evidence, nope, I'm still not gonna believe it. Why do you think that happens? And I don't know, what can we
Yeah,
do about that?
yeah, another lovely question. So I think one of the key takeaways from this new science of mental immunity is that our mind's immune systems react to threats, to the beliefs that are currently on board, but they don't always react properly to bad information.
Mm.
And sometimes they get confused and attack good information. So by becoming aware of the way in which your own mind's immune system works and helping it work better, you can begin to solve these problems and become less susceptible to these things. Here's how, let me use an example. When the COVID pandemic was breaking, Donald Trump for a while held daily news conferences about it. He loved the attention. And at one of those conferences, he mused out loud that maybe we could treat COVID by injecting disinfectant into people.
Mm-hmm.
And when he said this, he turned to his right and looked at Deborah Birx, who was the head of his coronavirus task force and somebody with some expertise in the area of, pandemic prevention.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the liberal progressive media went nuts about this because Donald Trump's suggestion just seemed to me to be, to so many, including me, to be utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
Now, ask yourself this. I'd like each of your listeners to ask yourself this. What happens in your mind when somebody makes a suggestion like that? Oh, just inject disinfectant and then you won't be infected, right? Makes sense. So let me ask you, Chris, what happens in your mind when
my thing, I asked, I'm like, what authority is saying this? What are their credentials, right? And where did they get this information from? And does anybody agree with them? Especially something like going into my body.
So Chris, you just mentioned three questions, three very good questions. Those questions are the antibodies of the mind. In fact, questions and doubts generally are the mind's antibodies. And when your mind generates the right kind of questions in the right way, your mind's resistance to bad ideas like, oh, why not inject disinfectant, gets stronger. Now, not everybody who heard that news conference has a mental immune system as healthy as yours. In fact, one public health official reported that a woman called in to ask whether she should inject bleach into her kid or feed bleach to her kid. Yeah. Yes, this actually happened, right? And this happened because, number one, Donald Trump was musing out loud about something that nobody who has, a high school education should even entertain. And he was doing it in front of cameras that were rolling so that lots of other people could get the wrong idea. It was hugely irresponsible of him to do that. And anybody with a well-functioning mental immune system should have spotted that right away. So the fact is, there are many, many ways to strengthen our resistance to bad ideas and to get better at letting in good ones also. And I talk about them in the book. And although this podcast is a wonderful chance to get out some of the core ideas, if any of your listeners are interested in developing their own immunity or helping their loved ones develop deeper immunity, I hope you'll check out the book. I think you'll find it worth your while.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and everybody should buy a bunch of extra copies for Christmas and just hand them out to people on the streets. There it is. Oh yeah, and yeah, like I said, yeah, maybe we'll do this again sometime because I could sit here and talk about this stuff forever. But
I think
aside,
I'd enjoy that.
yeah, for everybody listening, aside from the book, is there anything else you got going on, or where they can stay up to date if you're going to be on other podcasts or featured anywhere or
Yeah.
anything
So
like that?
two good ways to sort of keep up with my work in this area are my website, andynorman.org, is one place. I list a lot of my media appearances and podcasts there. I have a Facebook author page, Andy Norman Author, where you can get a steady stream of helpful hints for how to strengthen your own mind's immune system. And I'm also building a research collaborative that can help us develop the science of mental immunity rapidly enough to help address this critical moment in history when disinformation seems to be tearing at the fabric of our culture. So I'm hoping that research collaborative will also put us on the fast track towards herd immunity to cognitive contagion.
Yeah, awesome. Very cool. So yeah, I will have all that stuff linked down below along with your amazing book. And thank you once again for coming on the podcast to discuss.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. All right. I hope you all enjoyed that conversation with Andy. We actually recorded it a couple weeks ago, and re-listening to it, I'm like, oh my God, that's by far one of my favorite conversations that I've had. I love the whole analogy of building that mental immune system. And, I talked to so many amazing authors and thinkers and everything like that. But I remember ending this conversation with Andy and just walking away and I felt like I had just a whole new bag of tools. And since that conversation, I've been going back to a lot of the things that we discussed and a lot of, things that Andy said about building your mental immune system. And yeah, it's been amazing. So yeah, again, make sure you check down in the description below. Go to Andy's website, check out the stuff he's posting. I'll link his Twitter as well as his Facebook author page. But please, please, please do yourself a favor and grab a copy of this book. And you think I was joking? Do you think I was joking when I said that you should buy a bunch of these and hand them out to people at Christmas? I am not kidding at all. This book is absolutely needed right now. And I think my biggest takeaway from this conversation was because I'm always wondering, who's the target audience? Do you think a conspiracy theorist is going to pick this up? It's the more people like us with open minds and trying to learn and improve and build our own mental immunity. When we start kind of spreading that message around, just like anything else, and creating kind of awareness around it, we're just going around and planting seeds. So that's kind of what I've been trying to do, because I don't like confrontation, but I do like the idea that I might be helping some people. So I think that was one of my biggest takeaways. So anyways, again, huge thanks to Andy for taking the time to come on here, and make sure you check out his book and get some copies for some other people. And make sure you check out the description down below for my social media links at The Rewired Soul. And there's also some other links if you want to support the podcast in any way. As you know, I have a reading habit. I have so many authors coming on too. So if you want to support the channel, you can buy some of my books at therewiredsoul.com. I've written some mental health books. And also there was an affiliate link for BetterHelp online therapy. Again, as many of you know, I am a recovering alcoholic and drug addict. I've struggled with depression and anxiety for most of my life, and mental health is my number one priority. So I've personally used BetterHelp. It's been very, very helpful. So if you can relate to that, or you're looking to try out some new therapy, go ahead and check out the affiliate link down below for BetterHelp online therapy. But anyways, again, make sure that you stay tuned in, because all week we have amazing episodes. And if you're not yet, make sure you're following or subscribed to the podcast. Leave a rating, leave a review. That helps get the message out there. And if you think this was a good episode, share it out there on social media. Help some people build some mental immunity. All right. But anyways, that's all I got for this episode. And I will see you all tomorrow with a brand new episode where I will be talking to Lee McIntyre about the scientific attitude. And fun fact, the person that Andy mentioned that like snuck in, not really snuck in, but like went in to a flat earther convention, that's actually Lee. All right, that's the guy I'm talking to tomorrow. So make sure that you stay tuned for that. All right, have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.